One wrong text message can ruin your night, but sometimes it changes your entire life. The night everything started, I was sitting alone on the floor of my apartment, still wearing the same clothes I had worn to work 12 hours earlier. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched on the table beside me. Rain tapped softly against the window overlooking the city, turning the lights outside into blurry streaks of gold and white. It had been one of those days that seemed determined to test every ounce of patience I had left. A student had gotten sick during class. My car refused to start after work. My landlord had emailed me about another rent increase. And to make things even better, my best friend Emily had canceled our dinner plans because she was stuck out of town. By 10:30 that night, I was exhausted, frustrated, and feeling very sorry for myself. I grabbed my phone and opened our text conversation. Without thinking, I started typing. I told her everything. I complained about the terrible day. I joked that the universe clearly had a personal problem with me. I even admitted that I was beginning to wonder if adulthood was just a never-ending series of bills and disappointments. The message was long. Embarrassingly long. When I finished, I pressed send and tossed my phone onto the couch. Then I walked into the kitchen to find something resembling dinner. 20 minutes later, I returned with a bowl of cereal and nearly dropped it when I saw a notification waiting on my screen. The reply was simple. Just one sentence. I think you may have sent that to the wrong person. I stared at the message. Then I stared at the contact number. Then I stared at the message again. My stomach sank. Somehow, instead of sending my emotional breakdown to Emily, I had sent it to an unfamiliar number I did not recognize. Heat rushed into my face. I immediately started typing an apology. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. That was meant for my friend. A minute later, another reply appeared. I assumed as much. The response should have ended the conversation. Any normal person would have ignored me after that. Instead, I found myself smiling for the first time all day. Well, thank you for being polite about it, I wrote. Most people would have blocked me by now. Several moments passed. Rain continued sliding down the glass outside my window. Then his answer arrived. Most people are missing out on interesting stories. I laughed quietly. It was such an unexpected response that I read it twice. Whoever this stranger was, he clearly was not annoyed. For reasons I could not explain, I typed back. Trust me, there is nothing interesting about my day. The reply came almost immediately. You would be surprised what other people find interesting. I leaned back against the couch and looked at the screen. Somewhere out there, a complete stranger was having a conversation with me about one of the worst days I had experienced in months. It was ridiculous. It was random. It made absolutely no sense. And yet I continued texting. I did not know his name. I did not know his age. I did not know where he lived or what he did for a living. All I knew was that he seemed willing to listen. At the time, I thought the biggest mistake I had made that night was sending a message to the wrong number. I had no idea I had just texted the one person who would change everything. The next morning, I convinced myself the conversation was over. People did not normally continue texting complete strangers after a wrong number incident. That belonged in romantic comedies and unrealistic internet stories, not real life. By 7 o'clock, I was already standing in my classroom arranging books across tiny desks while sunlight filtered through the windows. The sounds of children arriving soon replaced the quiet. Backpacks dropped onto chairs. Excited voices filled the room. Questions came from every direction at once. As always, my students managed to pull me completely into their world. For a few hours, I forgot about the mysterious stranger on the other side of my phone. Then my lunch break arrived. I sat alone in the teacher's lounge with a sandwich and a cup of coffee when my phone vibrated. My heart reacted before my brain could catch up. One new message. From the unknown number. I stared at the screen for several seconds before opening it. I hope today is treating you better than yesterday. I actually laughed out loud. A teacher across the room glanced at me curiously. I quickly looked back down at the phone. The message was simple. Friendly. Unexpected. Before I could overthink it, I replied. So far my car has not broken down and nobody has increased my rent. I would call that progress. 3 minutes later, another message appeared. An impressive improvement. The conversation should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt strangely easy. Over the next several days, a pattern developed. We never texted constantly. Sometimes hours passed between messages. Sometimes entire afternoons disappeared. Yet somehow the conversation always resumed. I learned very little about him. Whenever I asked personal questions, he answered carefully. Not dishonestly, just selectively. I knew he traveled often for work. I knew he slept less than he probably should. I knew he preferred listening over talking. Beyond that, he remained a mystery. Oddly enough, I found myself sharing things I rarely told anyone else. Not deep secrets. Just ordinary pieces of life. Stories about my students. Funny moments from work. Complaints about grading papers on weekends. Somehow those little conversations became part of my daily routine. One evening, I was sitting by my apartment window watching rain slide down the glass when another message arrived. You seem to care about your students. I smiled while reading it. Ido. A minute later came the reply. Why? The question caught me off guard. I looked out at the city lights before answering. Because children remember how people make them feel. Sometimes one good teacher can change everything. Several minutes passed before his response arrived. That sounds like something you learned personally. My fingers paused above the screen. The stranger had a habit of noticing things other people missed. Maybe, I finally typed. Another pause. Then his answer appeared. Then those students are lucky to have you. I read the message twice. No one had said something like that to me in a very long time. Across the city, inside a private office high above Manhattan, Vincent Moretti sat alone looking at the same conversation. For reasons he could not fully explain, he found himself waiting for my replies. Meanwhile, I sat in my small apartment smiling at a phone screen like an idiot. Neither of us knew where this strange connection was heading. We only knew that every night, when the city grew quiet, one message somehow led to another. 2 weeks after the first message, texting him had become as natural as drinking coffee in the morning. I no longer stared at my phone wondering whether he would reply. Somehow I simply knew he would. The strange part was that I still knew almost nothing about him. Most people reveal pieces of themselves without realizing it. They mention favorite restaurants, childhood memories, family members, small details that slowly form a picture. Vincent did not do that. He answered questions when I asked them, but always carefully. It was like talking to someone standing just behind a curtain. I could hear him clearly. I simply could not see the whole picture. One Friday evening, I sat on my apartment balcony wrapped in a blanket while the city lights shimmered below. Spring had finally arrived. Warm air drifted through the streets. Somewhere nearby, music played from an open window. My phone buzzed. Rough day. I smiled immediately. How did you know? His reply arrived almost instantly. You have not complained about your students yet. I laughed out loud. One of them tried to convince the entire class that penguins should be allowed to vote. Several seconds passed. Then came the response. That seems reasonable. Penguins have suffered political exclusion for too long. I nearly dropped my phone laughing. For the next hour, we exchanged messages about everything and nothing. The conversation wandered from school stories to favorite books to terrible coffee. It was easy, effortless, comfortable. Eventually, I found myself asking something I had wondered about for days. What do you actually do for work? A long pause followed. Longer than usual. I watched the typing indicator appear and disappear twice. Finally, his answer arrived. Business. I rolled my eyes. That is not an answer. Another pause. It is technically an answer. It is. Also suspicious. Several minutes later, a new message appeared. People tend to become uncomfortable when they know too much about me. I stared at the screen. The sentence felt heavier than anything he had said before. Should I be worried? I typed. The reply came quickly this time. No. For some reason I believed him. Across Manhattan, Vincent sat alone in a private office overlooking the city skyline. Several men in expensive suits had spent the evening discussing contracts, investments, and negotiations. None of those conversations stayed in his mind. Instead, he found himself rereading a message about voting penguins. The realization would have been embarrassing if anyone else knew about it. Back in my apartment, I set the phone down and looked out across the city. Somewhere out there was a man I had never met, never seen, and barely understood. Yet he knew when I had a bad day. He knew when I was stressed. He knew when I needed someone to listen. More surprisingly, I had started looking forward to our conversations. That realization should have worried me. Instead, it made me smile. The following week, the pattern continued. Every evening brought another conversation, another unexpected joke, another glimpse into the mind of someone who remained mostly a mystery. Then one night, everything shifted. I was grading papers at my kitchen table when a news story appeared on television in the background. A reporter stood outside a luxury hotel, discussing a major business acquisition involving one of the most powerful private investors in New York. The camera briefly showed a photograph. I barely looked up at first. Then I froze. The name displayed beneath the image felt strangely familiar. Vincent Moretti. My eyes locked onto the television screen. Somewhere deep inside, a small warning bell began ringing. And for the first time since our conversation started, I found myself wondering exactly who I had been texting all along. I spent the rest of that evening staring at my phone and pretending I was not curious. It did not work. The television report had ended several minutes earlier, but the name remained stuck in my head. Vincent Moretti. I had seen his face for less than 5 seconds, yet something about it felt impossible to ignore. The man on the screen had stood in front of cameras wearing an expensive suit, while reporters discussed billion-dollar deals and private investment firms. That image did not match the person who spent evenings debating penguin voting rights with me through text messages. Or maybe it did. I honestly did not know anymore. For nearly an hour, I argued with myself about whether I should ask him directly. Eventually curiosity won. I picked up my phone and typed, "Interesting night." His response arrived a few minutes later. "That sounds dangerous." I smiled despite myself. I may have accidentally seen someone on television. There was a longer pause than usual. Then came the reply. "And?" I looked out the window at the city lights before answering. He looked suspiciously familiar. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, a message arrived. Television can be misleading. I laughed softly. That is not exactly a denial. Another pause. Then his answer appeared. No, it is not. For several moments, I simply stared at the screen. The confirmation should have shocked me more than it did. Instead, it felt like discovering the missing piece of a puzzle. Somehow deep down, I had already suspected there was more to him than he admitted. "So you are rich?" I asked. His response came immediately. "That is a very direct question. I am a teacher. We do not have time for subtlety." Several seconds later, a new message arrived. "I am comfortable." I rolled my eyes. "That means yes." To my surprise, a laughing emoji appeared. It was the first one he had ever used. The sight of it felt strangely important. Over the next week, our conversations continued, but something had changed. Not in a bad way. If anything, there was more honesty between us. Vincent still protected his privacy, but occasionally small details slipped through. He traveled frequently. He owned multiple companies. He attended meetings that lasted far too long. Meanwhile, I continued telling him stories about school. One evening, I sent him a photograph of a hand-drawn thank you card one of my students had given me. The card featured a stick figure that was supposedly me standing beside a giant rainbow. "This is beautiful," Vincent replied. "I think the artist captured your likeness perfectly." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. Moments like that became my favorite part of the day. Then one Friday night, something happened that surprised me even more. I was sitting on my couch grading papers when my phone vibrated. The message came first. "How did the parent conference go?" I blinked. I had mentioned the meeting 3 days earlier. 3 days. He remembered. Most people forgot details within hours. Somehow, Vincent remembered things I barely remembered telling him. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying. "It went well. Thank you for asking." His answer arrived a minute later. "Good. I was hoping it would." The warmth that spread through my chest caught me completely off guard. Somewhere between the wrong number and countless late-night conversations, a stranger had become the person I looked forward to hearing from most. And for the first time, that realization frightened me just a little. The more I learned about Vincent, the more questions appeared. That should have made me cautious. Instead, it made me curious. Summer was approaching, and the school year was slowly winding down. My students had already entered that strange phase where concentrating on lessons became nearly impossible, because everyone could practically smell vacation in the air. Every afternoon, I returned home exhausted, made a cup of tea, and eventually found myself reaching for my phone. Somehow, our conversations had become part of the rhythm of my life. One Tuesday evening, I was sitting by my apartment window watching the sunset paint the buildings in shades of gold and orange when a message appeared. "How was your day?" Such a simple question, yet it immediately improved my mood. One student tried to convince me that homework violates basic human rights. His reply came seconds later. A bold legal argument. I smiled. I told him he should save it for law school. You may have created a future attorney. The conversation continued the way it always did. Easy, comfortable, familiar. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time, Vincent shared a little more about himself. It started when I asked why he was still awake so late. Normally he would dodge the question. This time he answered. "Long meeting. About business?" I asked. "Partly." Several moments passed before another message appeared. Mostly about people making complicated problems more complicated. I laughed. That sounds exactly like teaching. Then perhaps our jobs are not so different. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. There was something oddly satisfying about finding common ground with someone whose life seemed completely different from mine. Over the following days, those small moments became more frequent. He told me he spent most of his time solving problems. I told him teachers did the same thing while receiving significantly less money. He admitted that he respected people who worked with children. I admitted that I respected people who remembered details from conversations weeks later. His answer surprised me. Remembering things about people matters. The message stayed with me long after I read it. One Friday evening, Emily finally returned from her trip, and we met for dinner. Halfway through the meal, she noticed me smiling at my phone. "Who is texting you?" she asked. I nearly choked on my drink. "Nobody." She narrowed her eyes immediately. "That means somebody." I groaned. "It is complicated. Those are my favorite kinds of stories." Against my better judgment, I explained everything. The wrong number. The conversations. The mysterious businessman. Emily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and stared at me. "You realize this sounds like the beginning of a movie." "It is not a movie. Olivia, you text this man every day. That does not mean anything." She smiled knowingly. "Keep telling yourself that." Later that night, after I returned home, another message appeared. "Dinner with your friend?" I blinked. I had mentioned it 3 days earlier. He remembered. Again. "Yes," I replied. "How did it go?" I hesitated before answering. Then I decided to be honest. "She thinks I talk about you too much." Several minutes passed. Then his reply arrived. "And do you?" Heat rushed into my face even though he could not see me. Outside, city lights glittered against the dark sky. Inside, my heart suddenly felt very aware of itself. For the first time since this strange connection began, I realized the question was not whether Vincent Moretti occupied my thoughts. The question was how much. The question stayed with me long after I sent my reply. How much did I think about Vincent? More than I wanted to admit. More than made sense for someone I had never met. The following week marked the official beginning of summer break, and for the first time in months my schedule felt lighter. No lesson plans. No grading. No early morning alarms. I should have felt relaxed. Instead, I found myself reaching for my phone even more often. One afternoon, I was sitting in a small coffee shop near my apartment when Emily rushed through the door carrying her laptop and a look of excitement. She slid into the seat across from me without even ordering a drink. "You are not going to believe what I found," she said. My stomach immediately tightened. That sentence never leads anywhere good. She turned her laptop around. A business magazine article filled the screen. The headline featured a photograph I recognized instantly. Vincent Moretti. Unlike the brief television appearance weeks earlier, this article contained pages of information. Major investments. Luxury hotels. real estate projects, private companies. The numbers alone were difficult to comprehend. I stared at the screen. Okay, I said slowly. So he is rich. Emily gave me a look. Keep reading. My eyes moved farther down the page. The article became less flattering. Rumors, speculation, stories about influence that extended far beyond business. Anonymous sources discussing connections to powerful organizations. Nothing directly criminal. Nothing concrete. Yet the implication was obvious. Vincent Moretti was not simply a wealthy businessman. He operated in a world most people never saw. A world built on power, loyalty, and secrets. My chest felt strangely tight. You think this is true? I asked quietly. Emily shrugged. I think powerful people attract stories. Some are true. Some are not. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. That evening I walked home beneath a sky painted orange and gold by the setting sun. For the first time since our conversations began, uncertainty followed me. When my phone vibrated later that night, I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before opening the message. You have been unusually quiet today. I looked out my apartment window toward the city lights. Then I typed the question I had been avoiding for hours. Who are you really? The response did not come immediately. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, the screen illuminated. I wondered when you would ask that. My heartbeat quickened. And another pause. The answer is complicated. I stood and walked closer to the window. Try me. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, returned. Then the message arrived. The stories you found online are not entirely wrong. My stomach dropped. Suddenly all the small mysteries made sense. The secrecy, the careful answers, the constant avoidance whenever conversations became too personal. I sat down slowly. You knew I would eventually discover it. Yes. Why did you not tell me? This time the answer came quickly. Because I like talking to Olivia Parker. Not the version of you that would be afraid of my reputation. I closed my eyes. The honesty in that response somehow made everything harder. Are you dangerous? I finally asked. The question hung between us. Minutes passed before his answer appeared. Not to you. I stared at those 3 words. Outside, traffic moved through the city below. Inside, my entire understanding of our relationship shifted. The stranger who had become part of my daily life was not who I thought he was. He was far more powerful, far more complicated. And for the first time since that wrong number text message, I seriously considered walking away before I became too attached to a world that could never belong to me. For the first time since our conversations began, I did not reply. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table and walked away. Outside, the city glowed. Beneath a humid summer night, traffic moved through the streets below. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from an open rooftop bar. Normally, I would have texted Vincent about something random and ordinary, a funny conversation, a strange news headline, a terrible movie recommendation. Instead, silence filled the space where our messages usually lived. The next morning, I woke up hoping clarity would arrive overnight. It did not. My phone remained quiet. Part of me felt relieved. Another part kept checking the screen anyway. By afternoon, I found myself sitting on a park bench watching children play near a fountain while replaying our last conversation again and again. Not to you. Those 3 words refused to leave my mind. They should have comforted me. Instead, they raised even more questions. How could someone promise that? How much power would a person need to make a statement like that with complete confidence? Emily listened patiently as I explained everything later that evening. When I finally finished, she stirred her iced coffee and studied me carefully. You are not scared of him, she said. You are scared of what he means. I frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means you already care about him. I immediately shook my head. That is not the problem. Her expression told me she disagreed. The uncomfortable truth was that she might have been right. Over the following days, the silence continued. Vincent never pushed, never demanded answers, never flooded my phone with messages. Somehow that made everything harder. Every evening I found myself expecting a notification that never came. Every morning I wondered if he was thinking about me too. Across the city, Vincent sat inside a private office overlooking Manhattan. Several advisors discussed business matters around a conference table, but his attention drifted elsewhere. For months, Olivia Parker had become part of his routine. Her stories, her observations, her honesty. Now the absence of those messages felt surprisingly noticeable. One evening, after nearly a week without contact, my phone finally vibrated. My heart reacted instantly. The message contained only one sentence. I hope your summer is going well. I stared at the screen for a long time. No pressure, no guilt, no attempt to explain himself. Just a simple message. The kind a friend might send. The kind I suddenly realized I had missed more than I wanted to admit. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then I typed. It is quieter than usual. The reply appeared almost immediately. Mine too. I smiled despite myself. Outside my apartment window, rain began tapping softly against the glass. The familiar sound brought back memories of that first accidental conversation months earlier. So much had changed since then. Yet somehow the feeling remained the same. Comfortable. Familiar. Real. We exchanged only a handful of messages that night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. But when I finally set my phone aside, something inside me felt lighter. The distance I had tried to create suddenly seemed impossible to maintain, because the truth was becoming harder to ignore. I had spent days convincing myself that Vincent Moretti belonged in a different world. A world too powerful, too complicated, and too far removed from my own. The problem was that every time we stopped talking, that world felt less frightening than the thought of losing him completely. By August, our conversations had found their rhythm again, but neither of us pretended things were exactly the same. The questions I had about Vincent still existed. The difference was that I no longer felt the need to answer all of them immediately. Some people reveal themselves through facts. Others reveal themselves through consistency. Vincent belonged to the second category. Every day he showed up. Every day he listened. Every day he somehow remembered details that most people forgot. One warm Saturday afternoon, I was helping organize a small community reading event at a public library. Children sat cross-legged on colorful rugs while volunteers handed out books and snacks. It was the kind of simple day I loved. During a break, I stepped outside with an iced tea and checked my phone. A message was waiting. How is your event going? I smiled instantly. The future generation is currently arguing about whether dragons would make good school principals. His response arrived seconds later. I support their leadership potential. I laughed and looked around at the busy sidewalk. For a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. Then another message appeared. What does the building across the street look like? I frowned. Why? A short pause followed. Just curious. I looked up. Across the street stood a brick bookstore with green awnings and flower boxes beneath the windows. I described it. Several seconds passed. Then my phone rang. My heart nearly stopped. Vincent had never called before. Not once. I stared at the screen before answering. Hello. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then a deep, familiar voice finally broke the silence. The bookstore description was accurate. My breath caught. I turned slowly. Halfway down the block, near the corner, a tall man stood beside a black sedan. Even from a distance, I recognized him immediately from the photographs I had seen online. Dark hair, tailored suit, calm posture. Vincent Moretti. My heart forgot how to function. You are here, I whispered. His voice carried a hint of amusement. That is usually how seeing someone works. I laughed nervously despite myself. Neither of us moved right away. The moment felt strangely fragile, like something that could disappear if handled too quickly. Finally, I started walking toward him. Each step made everything feel more real. Months of messages. Months of conversations. Months of wondering. And suddenly he was standing in front of me. When I stopped a few feet away, neither of us seemed to know what to say. The reality was different from the imagination. Better somehow. Vincent looked exactly like the photographs and completely different at the same time. The public image projected confidence and power. The man standing in front of me looked relieved. Hi, I finally said. He smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had ever seen from him. Olivia. Hearing my name spoken in his voice felt surprisingly significant. Around us, people continued walking down the sidewalk, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted. We spent the next hour walking through nearby streets, talking the same way we always had through text messages, school stories, books, terrible coffee, ordinary things. Yet nothing about the afternoon felt ordinary. As the sun slowly began sinking behind the skyline, Vincent stopped near the edge of a small park and looked at me carefully. "I wanted to meet you because there is something important you should know," he said. My pulse quickened. The city seemed to grow quieter around us. For the first time I saw uncertainty in his expression, and somehow that frightened me more than all the secrets that had come before. The uncertainty in Vincent's expression disappeared almost as quickly as I noticed it, but the fact that it had been there at all stayed with me. Powerful people were supposed to look confident, untouchable, certain. Yet standing beside me beneath the fading light of a New York evening, Vincent looked like a man who genuinely cared about what happened next. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Cars passed in the distance. Leaves shifted gently in the summer breeze. Finally, he took a slow breath. "I did not come here to convince you to be part of my world," he said. "I came because you became part of mine a long time ago." My heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they carried a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. I looked away toward the skyline glowing beneath the setting sun. "You make that sound easy." A small smile appeared on his face. "Nothing about this has been easy." For the first time I believed that completely. We sat on a nearby bench as evening settled over the city. The conversation that followed lasted hours. There were no dramatic revelations. No soking secrets. Just honesty. Vincent told me about the pressure that came with responsibility, about how trust was rare in his world, about how most people saw his reputation before they saw him. I told him about my fears, about how intimidating his life seemed from the outside, about how impossible it felt that a wrong number text message had somehow led us here. At one point he laughed softly and shook his head. "Do you know what I remember most?" he asked. "What?" "The penguins." I laughed so hard that nearby pedestrians turned to look. "Of all our conversations, that is what stayed with you." It was a surprisingly strong political argument. The ease between us returned instantly. Felt familiar. Natural. Like coming home after being away for too long. As the night grew later, we walked through quiet streets illuminated by golden streetlights. The same city that once felt enormous suddenly seemed much smaller. Eventually, we reached the corner where his car waited. Neither of us seemed eager to say goodbye. Vincent looked at me for a long moment. "If this is too much," he said quietly, "I will understand." I studied his face. The powerful businessman. The mysterious stranger. The man who had listened to every complaint, remembered every detail, and somehow become one of the most important people in my life without ever asking for anything in return. Then I smiled. "You know, I spent months thinking I accidentally texted the wrong number." A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "And now?" I glanced up at the city lights above us. The answer felt surprisingly clear. "Now I think it may have been the luckiest mistake I ever made." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent smiled. Not the polite smile from photographs. Not the controlled smile from interviews. A real one. The kind that reached his eyes. Months later, whenever people asked how we met, the story always sounded ridiculous. A tired teacher. A wrong number. A stranger who replied. Yet life rarely changes because of the moments we expect. Sometimes everything begins with one small mistake and a single message sent into the dark. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the person who answers becomes exactly who you needed to find.